All right. So, our next review of the day is going to be for the film Blue Beetle. Blue Beetle is the latest superhero film to come out this year. This is about a DC superhero, pretty much a D-list DC superhero, pretty much.
Mm.
Would you say that? Like, is he lower than D-list, or would you even go lower and say like E-list?
Honestly, he's not really D-list. The original Blue Beetle was probably around the maybe C-list-esque hero, but he was an enjoyable C-list. And when this new revival of it kind of kept him around, got him relevant enough to be around C, but he's never been more than just a good mid-tier C-list character. But he did have a good run in the revival comics, and he's still I guess, for those who still remember Garrett and the original Blue Beetles, he's still well liked, and I would say the revival character does pretty good now. He's the one that most people see now, the Raimi's version.
Yeah, Jaime Reyes, who this is,
Yeah.
he's the third incarnation, third Blue Beetle
Hmm.
there in the line of Blue Beetles, Dust has mentioned before. And that's who this movie is following. And you have Morduena, who's in this, who people might know he was in Cobra Kai. So when he got cast as Blue Beetle, I was like, hey, that's pretty good casting. I really like him on Cobra Kai. I think he does a good job there. So to put him in a vehicle like this, may be good for him. I will say from the trailer for this movie, I wasn't too big on it. I was like, I don't know that some of the effects don't look really that good. Some of this looks
Hmm.
really kind of corny, kind of generic. And actually going to see this movie, I will say the best thing about it. And oh, actually, let me tell a little bit more about the plot. So you have this kid, Rami Reyes, who gets this scarab, and the scarab turns him into the Blue Beetle, attaches himself to him, turns himself to the Blue Beetle. And of course, you have bad guys who want this very powerful object, and the bad guy here is actually a bad woman by the name of Susan Sarandon, and billionaire. Usually, what do bad guys want to do with experimental tech? They want to make it into a weapon. They want to give it to the
Hmm.
military, turn it into a big weapon. That's what she wants to do here with it, and get it from them in order to take over the world or whatever. That's kind of the big premise here. So he has to kind of fight her off and from threatening him and his family. So that's kind of the basic setup you have here of the film. But yeah, so I would say the best element about this film is the family. When it's him and his family all together, that's the best part by far.
Hmm.
And especially like you have the standouts like with George Lopez, who plays his Uncle Rudy. I think he's really great in here. There are a lot of coincidences in this movie and things that just happen because, well, it just needs to happen. And a lot of movies are coincidences. But here is just, I just feel like there's an excessive amount of it, and also a lot of expository dialogue that's like really clumsily handled, where people just drop tons of stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
At kind of once. That's kind of a little clumsy there. But I think anytime it was him and the family, I thought it worked on that level. It just, the worst parts of it are the superhero parts, which is kind of not what you want to hear if you're doing a superhero movie. And this what this is a superhero film. And the reason why the superhero stuff is kind of the worst part is because I think if you listen to a lot of other reviews and getting some other people's, and this has a good rating on Rotten Tomatoes. It's at like certified fresh, I think currently right now. It's at like 80 something percent last time I checked.
Hmm.
But from a lot of reviews, I think you'll hear is a lot the word generic. You'll hear that this is, I've seen this a million times before. And in the year of 2023, how many gajillion superhero movies, shows, properties that we've seen now be adapted and be brought into media? The most general audience by now, I would assume you've seen at least one superhero movie, at least one of these things before. And I think if you've seen at least one or two superhero movies before, you probably will be familiar with the beats that this is going. Even the whole concept of like this young boy who gets these powers. It's like, okay, you can connect that to Spider-Man. The whole thing with the suit that can turn into all these different objects and weapons. It's like you can get that with Iron Man. That's what Iron Man did. The whole billionaire bad guy, we've seen that in a lot of superhero movies. Again, the whole, that was even a plot in Iron Man. The whole thing about turning into a weapon, all
Hmm.
that stuff, you'll get those beats still there. And I feel like the movie isn't too preoccupied with a lot of the superhero stuff. It just is mainly focused on a lot of the cultural elements and the family elements. And I think that excels and that does really well because I felt a lot of stuff there with the
Hmm.
family that worked really well. But it's just everything outside of that with the villain. Like Susan Sarandon is just sleepwalking through this. Like I don't even
Hmm.
know if it's sleepwalking. I think it's a Weekend at Bernie's where they just propping her up and then just kind of just feeding her lines in an earpiece like Bruce Willis or something.
Oh my.
Where where it's just she's just delivered in the most flat kind of non-emotional way in a lot of her scenes. And Susan
Especially
Sarandon,
when she first showed up.
yeah. And Susan Sarandon is a great actress. She's
Oh
great.
yeah.
Very icon, legend. Susan Sarandon is, and here it's just kind of like I think she's so out of place, and a lot of her stuff is underwritten too. I think
Hmm.
for her to do a lot of stuff she is, and she doesn't become. So she doesn't only become someone interesting until the very end of the movie. Same thing with the henchman character,
Hmm.
where she's with. He doesn't become interesting until the very end. By the time it's way too late. And the whole thing, the whole fight with of course, that's why these superhero movies they all have to end with a big fight at the end. It's just the same fight we've seen of like the hero is going to fight a mirrored evil version of himself, which again we've seen plenty of times have
Mm.
happened in other superhero movies. So I'm going to pass it to you and get your thoughts on Blue Beetle here.
Yeah, I think the word generic kind of sums up a lot of the superhero parts. Uh, honestly, for the casting wise, I think everyone does a good job. I actually like my boy Mariduena. I think he does a great job as Jamie. He has a lot of exuberance, a lot of enthusiasm. He carries a lot of just this youthful approach to this character, and you do end up liking him as Jamie. I think for the most part, I think his family dynamic is
Jaime.
also
Jaime.
Jaime. Shit, Jaime. Yeah. I'm so used to reading the comics with the J, but yeah, Jaime. Yeah, that pronunciation. I think he does a. I think the whole family dynamic is the best part. George Lucas as his uncle as a standout, um, as just this guy who's just a conspiracy nut, but fair. Honestly, in that kind of a world in DC, I mean, absolutely fair enough, and especially in the real world as we're learning more and more. Uh, yeah, that's such a bad thing. But I think overall, uh, yeah, there's certain roles that everyone's pretty good at, and then other ones that you're just walking through, like Susan Sarandon, where you're just like, yeah, you got nothing here. You're just generic villainous, and just couldn't be more evil. I mean, she even mispronounces the guy's name, just calls one of the henchmen just Sanchez. Doesn't even try. Doesn't even try to know who he actually is. Uh, I think where the movie is successful when it is that collective family unit, and actually that's closer to what the comics felt like. The comics felt less. It was a superhero comic, but it also was mostly the family dynamic. The family found out about his suit powers relatively early. He included them in that dynamic. It wasn't about being a secret identity. It was making sure that other people didn't know about him, and so he worked with them as well. They helped keep his secret. And yeah, I think it does come down to when it's everyone involved, the tried and true superhero elements. That's when it kind of gets really bogged down by them and it doesn't lift it up the way it should. I think it also it doesn't help that this is PG-13 and some people just bite the dust and you're like, oh, did they? Or there's a lot of implied death, but I think a little more visceralness would have probably done it a bit more good, especially in some of the scenes. That's kind of where I come from on it.
Mm, okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm just gonna keep hammering that home. It bringing in the kind of the Latin culture,
Hmm.
Latino culture here into it, infusing that. And the director of this movie, let me see if I can pull him up real quick, unless you already have him pulled up. It's Angel Manuel Soto here. So
Hmm.
infusing a lot of that into the movie, I think helps it because I feel like they really much stress that stuff there, which I think works. It's just they were like with the superhero stuff, it's like, well, you kind of already know the beats of this already, so it's
Hmm.
not really all that interesting. So we're just kind of gonna go through the motions there because it has the whole scene where he gets on the suit, and of course there's always that scene when somebody gets their powers and they're trying to figure it out. I was like, oh, what do I do? That for comedic purposes and everything like
Hmm.
that we've seen in tons of other movies there. So there's that. You have a love interest in this movie who I think she's just there to be the love interest. I don't think this again, she feels like the Susan Sarandon character where she feels very underwritten. There's really not much for
Mhm.
her to do. And I'm talking about the character Jenny Cord, who's played by let's see, Bruna Marquezi. Who's I probably butchered the hell out of that, but I'm sorry. But gorgeous woman, stunning woman,
Mhm.
stunning woman. But I just feel like there's really nothing for her to do here in this at all. The whole thing with the suit and the AI in the suit of like how he has this connection again. They don't really put a too much of an interest in spin on that because you can have something that's generic but you can have your own good spin on it and still make it a lot of fun, even if you are following the beats. And I don't think it really does
Mhm.
that enough. It just feels kind of like, if you're a person who is suffering from superhero fatigue, even people who I've seen people who go like, even with good superhero stuff like The Boys or Invincible,
Mhm.
it's like I can't watch it. I just because I'm just tired of this stuff.
Yeah.
So if you really are truly just tired of this stuff, this isn't really going to help because it's not something as transformative or inventive as Spider-Verse or something like that,
Mm.
where I have to go like, hey, you gotta go see this movie. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
not
you gotta
something
check
that,
it out.
yeah, even if you don't even like superhero stuff,
Mhm.
I would recommend Spider-Verse because just of what it does on the screen of, just how visually entertaining it is. Uh Here it's not doing anything on that level. So I was like, I can't even recommend on that level.
Right.
It is kind of just plain in that sense. But when it has to go for the emotional moments, I think it works. I think I did feel a lot of emotion there when it in those moments, and I think it worked there. But the action is, you know it doesn't look as bad as I saw it in the trailer. I think they cleaned it up a little bit, but it still looks like a little step above
Mhm.
like what you would see on TV. And it's funny, this was supposed to be originally an HBO Max movie. This was supposed to come on HBO Max at first, but
Yeah.
then the head of Warner Brothers at the time, David Zaslav, pushed for it to be released in theaters. It's funny that he pushed for this to be released in theaters, but not Batgirl to be released in theaters. Because you think Batgirl, I mean, that seemed also like, okay, at least she has the connection of Batman, and
Mhm.
Batman was going to be in it. But okay, whatever. But and I like to see a character like this, I mean, be brought to the big screen because I think the most exposure Blue Beetle's ever gotten is probably him being on Young Justice. That's pretty
Yeah.
much, I mean, that's pretty much the most exposure I think he's gotten as a character. And also he was in also the Injustice video game too.
Yeah.
He was also in that. So that's probably the most exposure the
Mhm.
character has really gotten.
He
So I
was
like.
also mhm. Mhm.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, he was also in the, Brave and the Bold Batman Brave and the Bold cartoon. He had a couple of episodes there too, so where
Okay.
other characters are introduced. He's had a bit of a resurgence as a character, and having him in this movie was nice to see. It's the kind of character you don't get to see as often, and so I was happy to hear about an announcement of any project that related to it. But yeah, just to echo the sentiments, I think the CGI's honestly, I've gotten to the point where CGI, I don't really care about that anymore. I care more about the characters and story, and as long as that those are fine and then the CGI is not like atrocious, I don't get too upset at it. And the CGI effects is better than what the trailers had initially. It's cleaned up a bit, but honestly, I just kept thinking to myself, they could have just stuck closer to the comics, or at least closer to the aspect of this could have been more low key about a young man discovering this weird alien thing and learning to kind of figure it out and having a lower stakes uh, thing, a lower stakes issue, and still coming out on top. I think that would have been a lot more intimate and help with the family as well, and would have helped me care more about the movie instead of going the usual superhero trope of everything's got to be big and you got to fight a mirrored version of yourself. And you got to do this. I think that would have been maybe a bit better in that aspect. But
Yeah.
as the movie as it is, I think they do the best what they have, and even though it's a bit generic, I think ultimately this added aspect of the family and culture and Yami as a character, I think shine more through, despite the aspects of it being more of a generic superhero by the beat story.
Mm, okay. So what would you give it?
Uh, yeah, it's a bit tough. Honestly, even though I wasn't that in love with the movie and I thought it was fine for the most part, Uh, this is a low matinee. This is a check it out if you want in the theaters, give it some love. I think if you do and you check it out in a nice matinee or go somewhere to a matinee theater or go for a decent price on a discount, I think you'll be have a solid time. If you're superheroed out, really tired, this isn't going to save it, but you might have a decent time. That maybe getting it on a streamer when later comes to HBO Max in like a month or two. But I think, yeah, I'm gonna give it because I liked for what it was, despite its own issues. I'm gonna give it a low matinee.
So like a low tune in.
Yeah, like a low tune in, the lowest I can give it.
Okay. Do you know the reviewers? You know Mark Commode? You know him, like British guys.
No, I
The
don't. Sorry.
I saw his review. And hello, Lemony Winks. Hello, by the way. Thanks for stopping by. And he kind of said it was kind of like Spy Kids. And he now
Yeah.
this wasn't in a derogatory sense. He was like and he said it in kind of a good way. And even though I never liked Spy Kids or any of the movies, I kind of get what he's saying. And it's funny, George Lopez was also in, he was in Spy Kids too. Um, but I kind of get what he was saying because it has that kind of feeling of it, but I don't think it's is as bad as a Spy Kids movie. I don't mean this as a derogatory sense to say it's like that. Even though I don't like those movies, I don't think it's bad as
Mhm.
something like that. But I do get kind of the sense of it is does have that kind of more skews more maybe younger than
Yeah.
some superhero movies traditionally do. Even though they are pretty for young kids already, I think the
Mhm.
skews maybe a tad bit younger, and everything like that. But still though, is this like a great start to James Gunn's DCU? Because before we started the review, started the podcast, we talked about how this movie
Yeah.
is supposed to be the start of James Gunn's. Like he claimed this movie, it's like this character is the first character in the DCU, not the
Oh god.
DCEU.
Yeah.
Um, which
God,
has
yeah.
all that. Oh yeah, go ahead. What were you gonna say?
No, no, no. Now that I'm thinking on that, now with that added context of this being the beginning of what he wants as the DC universe, his rebooted DC universe, I have to bump this down. I have to give this just a stream it because like I remember seeing Iron Man. Iron Man was a really solid start, really good start. Robert Downey Jr. A simpler story. Yeah, it had the same thing, but it had the advent of being one of the first of its kind. We weren't burnt out by it, and I thought the performance was slightly better in that it had a more coherent story to it, and you knew what was happening, and you had the charisma of Robert Downey Jr. carrying this movie. As much as I like Amy and I like the actor who plays him, he's not given a lot to really wrestle with his ability too long. He honestly only has it and really starts to really form an opinion on it until much later in the film, and that's something he should have been much more dealing with throughout the movie. It felt very
Mm,
fast paced and it felt more like a B story as we're kind of going on rather than this A story it should have been all throughout. And the family dynamic and how do we keep this a secret? How do we deal with this? What's going on? And as he's dealing with it, yeah, just all considering that and this being the launch pad for other things to come, I have to bump it down to a stream it.
mm,
I yeah, I just can't give it anything else now with that consideration.
yeah. So this is the start of it. And yeah, like I said, now that in the year 2023 we're seeing so many of this stuff, it's yeah, I mean, it just comes off as really super generic,
Hmm.
and kind of plain, and an amalgamation of all these other different superhero movies that you've seen
Hmm.
before. Even though I do like that, this character, like I said, a smaller character like this being
Hmm.
brought to the big screen, I think is fine. But I wish they did it in more of an original way and made the story feel a little bit fresher. And in some sense, they kind of do with, like I said, the family stuff. I'm gonna keep hammering that home. The family stuff is all really great. I love all the actors in his family, the mother, the father, the sister. I think they all do a great job, and they do all feel like a real family together. The Bella is really great as well. She has some great moments, fun moments too. That's why I said the stuff with her too feels a little kind of Spy Kids-ish too, a little stuff, but
Yeah.
it's kind of fun. I think it's kind of fun, they stuff they do with her, and all that stuff. But yeah, so yeah, the cultural elements there and the family stuff, that I think that helps it a lot, and the whole kind of discussing a lot of those discrepancies when it comes, because they live in like it's this fictional city called Palmer City, which is
Yeah.
basically kind of like it's like a Miami. It looks like it's like a Miami, Florida type environment. And then there's scenes where they're sitting on their roof and they're looking at the big city that's across the tracks from them, even though it doesn't always look the best. Like when they're looking at the
Yeah.
city, like it doesn't always look, but it's like the city is living in the year, like they're living in Blade Runner, they're living in
Yeah.
2049, and then they're still living in 1986. Like the
Yeah.
discrepancy
Yeah.
is huge.
Exactly.
So I kind of like some of that stuff there that they do there,
It-
but it just
mhm.
it's not enough to overcome the generic nature of the
No.
superhero stuff that just falls completely flat on every level. Like I wasn't interested at all
Mhm.
in any of the super, not the
Yeah.
villain, not
Yeah.
the the love interest, any of that stuff. Um,
It's a
yes,
shame though with El Paso as well that this character was originally representing El Paso. He lived there, and that was his home turf. And it's a real shame that they kind of changed it. I know why they changed it to Palmera City, but it's a shame because how many superheroes do you come from El Paso?
yeah. I was listening to
None.
Angry Joe, and I think Angry Joe said that this movie was filmed in El Paso, and
Yeah, it
also
was,
it was filmed here, filmed in El Paso, and also it was
and it
filmed a little bit in
premiered.
Puerto Rico. I think it was filmed in both those
Mm.
places. So,
It also premiered in El Paso as well. But
oh, okay.
Yep, it premiered in El Paso, but nope, can't name your you can't name the city for which the hero is in it.
Okay.
Um, I get it. I understand the logic of the director. He wanted a fictional city for for his character. He's like Superman gets one, Batman gets one, the Flash gets one. Why can't Jamie Reyes? Why can't he get his own city? And I'm like, I I feel you. Uh, but he's also from he's from El Paso, man. I thought El Paso was great because he was a humble character and he was from a smaller place in Texas that you wouldn't expect him to be. That was part of the advantage. Him going
Mm,
around bumping into stuff, it's kind of hard to hide an alien hiding in you and passing it off as kind of folklore or myth or at least, oh, that didn't actually happen when you're in the middle of a gigantic city. It's like he didn't understand some of that homework that was part of the character and what made those original comics pretty interesting. It was because it was in a smaller town that he had the advantage until later he had to do later where he has to stop an invasion and deal with that much later on, and it gets bigger and from that point. But he's earned it by that point to then upgrade to these other cities and help out and get better.
yeah. Yeah. So I would agree with you. It's a streaming.
Hmm.
I would agree with you. Kind of just around that territory. So yeah. Yeah. And by the way, if you want to, there's two post-credit scenes with this. There's two credit scenes. One is necessary, I guess, and then the other one not necessary.
Hmm.
So there's one right after, like, was it, mid credits,
Yeah,
and then the other one's after the credits. But the other one after the credits, you don't need to stay for if you don't
yeah.
want to. So just throwing that out there. So yeah, two streamings for Blue Beetle.